The abandoned space station drifted silently in the black void of space, its once thriving corridors now filled with echoes of lost time. Captain John Walker and his elite squad of soldiers were on a mission that most would consider a suicide run. A distress signal from this derelict station had been intercepted, and with no other explanation, they were tasked with investigating. No one had heard from the Zorian Empire in years, and now, it seemed, their history was about to unravel in ways no one could predict. Walker glanced over his shoulder at the rest of his crew: Bonner, the grizzled veteran, Rhea, the tech expert, and a few other soldiers, all ready for whatever came next. But no one could have prepared for what awaited them. The door to the station's main chamber opened with a low groan, and the team stepped inside, the weight of the atmosphere thick with dust. The station was eerily quiet, its lights flickering sporadically. At first glance, it looked like any other abandoned relic in the galaxy, a place left behind by a race too advanced, too powerful to remain in the galaxy for long. But something about this place felt different. "Stay sharp," Walker commanded, his voice low but firm. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." As they moved deeper into the station's hallways, the air grew colder and strange symbols covered the walls. Alien language, perhaps. No one could say for sure, but Walker knew they needed answers. The team pushed on, their boots echoing on the metal floors. Then, as if out of nowhere, she appeared. A figure stepped from the shadows. She was tall, with long flowing hair that shimmered like silver in the dim light. Her skin, pale yet glowing, seemed almost unnatural in its perfection. Her eyes were a brilliant shade of violet, sharp and intense. The air around her seemed to crackle with an otherworldly energy, and for a moment, none of them could speak. She was a Zorian woman, no doubt about it. "Captain Walker, I presume." The words came out smoothly, though there was an unmistakable tension in her voice. "I have been waiting for you." The squad raised their weapons, but Walker stopped them with a single hand. He recognized her. This woman was not an enemy, at least not yet. He had studied the Zorian species extensively before setting out on this mission, and although they were known for their beauty, their strength, and their highly advanced technology, they were also a deeply isolated people. "Who are you?" Walker asked, his tone cautious but steady. The alien woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she extended her hand, holding something small and compact. It glowed faintly, humming with a strange energy. It was a device, but it didn't look like anything they had seen before. In fact, it looked almost harmless. There were no obvious signs of weaponry, no hidden dangers. "This," she said, her voice softer now, "is a toy. A human toy." Walker exchanged a quick glance with Rhea, his tech expert. It didn't make sense. The device in her hand looked far too advanced to be a mere toy. But before anyone could question her further, the woman spoke again. "You don't understand. The device, it's part of something much bigger, something that has the power to change everything." Her eyes flickered nervously as she held it out toward Walker. The way she was acting, the urgency in her voice, suggested there was far more to this device than she was letting on. "A toy?" Walker asked, raising an eyebrow. "This looks like something far more dangerous." The alien woman nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his. "You don't know what you're holding. Humans, you never understand the potential you have." There was a strange sadness in her voice as she spoke the words. Before Walker could respond, the woman's eyes widened in shock, and she stepped back, almost as if she had just realized something horrifying. Her face grew pale, and her voice faltered. "No, it can't be." "What's wrong?" Bonner growled, his finger still on the trigger of his weapon. Zira, the Zorian woman, looked frantic now, as though something had triggered a wave of fear in her. "It's not supposed to be this way. It wasn't meant for anyone but us. It was never supposed to be activated by." Before she could finish, the device in her hand suddenly hummed louder, and a surge of energy filled the room. The walls seemed to pulse with the strange vibration, and for a split second, the entire station seemed to shudder as if alive. The abandoned space station drifted silently in the black void of space, its once thriving corridors now filled with echoes of lost time. Captain John Walker and his elite squad of soldiers were on a mission that most would consider a suicide run. A distress signal from this derelict station had been intercepted, and with no other explanation, they were tasked with investigating. No one had heard from the Zorian Empire in years, and now, it seemed, their history was about to unravel in ways no one could predict. Walker glanced over his shoulder at the rest of his crew: Bonner, the grizzled veteran, Rhea, the tech expert, and a few other soldiers, all ready for whatever came next. But no one could have prepared for what awaited them. The door to the station's main chamber opened with a low groan, and the team stepped inside, the weight of the atmosphere thick with dust. The station was eerily quiet, its lights flickering sporadically. At first glance, it looked like any other abandoned relic in the galaxy, a place left behind by a race too advanced, too powerful to remain in the galaxy for long. But something about this place felt different. "Stay sharp," Walker commanded, his voice low but firm. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." As they moved deeper into the station's hallways, the air grew colder and strange symbols covered the walls. Alien language, perhaps. No one could say for sure, but Walker knew they needed answers. The team pushed on, their boots echoing on the metal floors. Then, as if out of nowhere, she appeared. A figure stepped from the shadows. She was tall, with long flowing hair that shimmered like silver in the dim light. Her skin, pale yet glowing, seemed almost unnatural in its perfection. Her eyes were a brilliant shade of violet, sharp and intense. The air around her seemed to crackle with an otherworldly energy, and for a moment, none of them could speak. She was a Zorian woman, no doubt about it. "Captain Walker, I presume." The words came out smoothly, though there was an unmistakable tension in her voice. "I have been waiting for you." The squad raised their weapons, but Walker stopped them with a single hand. He recognized her. This woman was not an enemy, at least not yet. He had studied the Zorian species extensively before setting out on this mission, and although they were known for their beauty, their strength, and their highly advanced technology, they were also a deeply isolated people. "Who are you?" Walker asked, his tone cautious but steady. The alien woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she extended her hand, holding something small and compact. It glowed faintly, humming with a strange energy. It was a device, but it didn't look like anything they had seen before. In fact, it looked almost harmless. There were no obvious signs of weaponry, no hidden dangers. "This," she said, her voice softer now, "is a toy. A human toy." Walker exchanged a quick glance with Rhea, his tech expert. It didn't make sense. The device in her hand looked far too advanced to be a mere toy. But before anyone could question her further, the woman spoke again. "You don't understand. The device, it's part of something much bigger. Something that has the power to change everything." Her eyes flickered nervously as she held it out toward Walker. The way she was acting, the urgency in her voice, suggested there was far more to this device than she was letting on. "A toy?" Walker asked, raising an eyebrow. "This looks like something far more dangerous." The alien woman nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his. "You don't know what you're holding. Humans, you never understand the potential you have." There was a strange sadness in her voice as she spoke the words. Before Walker could respond, the woman's eyes widened in shock, and she stepped back, almost as if she had just realized something horrifying. Her face grew pale, and her voice faltered. "No, it can't be." "What's wrong?" Bonner growled, his finger still on the trigger of his weapon. Zira, the Zorian woman, looked frantic now, as though something had triggered a wave of fear in her. "It's not supposed to be this way. It wasn't meant for anyone but us. It was never supposed to be activated by." Before she could finish, the device in her hand suddenly hummed louder, and a surge of energy filled the room. The walls seemed to pulse with this strange vibration, and for a split second, the entire station seemed to shudder as if alive. Zyra's eyes were wide with terror. "It's not supposed to be like this," she said again, her voice almost a whisper. "This is what happens when a Shorian device interacts with a human. The results, they are unpredictable. The device is changing you." Walker could feel it now, the changes. His body seemed to hum with an unfamiliar energy, his senses heightened in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He could hear the faintest sounds, the softest movements, in the shadows of the room. He could feel the heat of the device in his hand, its energy seeping into his very bones. "Stop talking in riddles," Rhys snapped, her eyes darting around as she kept her weapon trained on Zyra. "What do you mean changing us? What does this thing do to us?" Zyra looked at Rhea, her expression full of regret and fear. "It's hard to explain. The device was never meant to interact with a species like yours. It was meant for the Shorian race alone, to bond with us, to ensure the survival of our kind. But for humans, it's different. It's creating a connection between you and the device, a bond, a biological reaction." Her voice trailed off as though the words themselves were too painful to say aloud. Walker's mind was racing. A bond. What did she mean? He felt his chest tighten as the strange energy pulsed within him. Something deep inside him was stirring, an unfamiliar force making him feel both terrified and alive at the same time. The connection between him and the device was undeniable, and as much as he wanted to push it away, he couldn't. It was as though the device had attached itself to his very soul. Suddenly, the air in the room seemed to grow colder. The walls flickered again, the hum of the device growing louder. Walker could feel the energy growing stronger, the strange connection between him and the alien technology intensifying. It was like a magnet pulling at him, urging him to understand, to accept its power. But the more he resisted, the stronger the pull became. "Captain," Bonner shouted, snapping Walker out of his trance. "Something's wrong. The ship's systems, everything's starting to shut down. We've got a bigger problem." Walker's heart sank as he realized what Bonner was saying. The lights flickered again, and the station's alarms began to blare, a shrill warning echoing through the halls. The AI systems that had once controlled the station were now malfunctioning, and the devices that kept the station running were beginning to fail. "We need to get out of here," Walker said urgently, his voice tight with fear. "Rhea, get those systems back online. Bonner, secure the perimeter. We're not alone." But it was already too late. The first shock had hit them, and now the station was reacting. The device had awakened something deep inside the station, something that could not be controlled. The battle to survive had only just begun. The alarms screamed through the station, their wailing sirens only adding to the tension that gripped the crew. Captain Walker's heart raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The air was thick with static, and the walls seemed to vibrate with an energy he couldn't understand. Every movement felt amplified, every sound sharper. The strange device in his hand hummed louder, as if it were calling to him, urging him to listen, to understand its true purpose. But it was becoming harder to focus. The connection between him and the device was growing stronger, more intense, pulling him in ways he couldn't explain. "Walker, we've got to move." Bonner's voice broke through the fog in Walker's mind. The veteran soldier's expression was a mixture of confusion and fear. "This place is falling apart. We need to get out now." Walker nodded, shaking off the strange sensations that had clouded his mind. He could feel his team's eyes on him, waiting for direction. But he had no answers. He didn't even know what was happening to him, let alone how to stop it. The device in his hand felt like it was alive, a part of him now, pushing and pulling at his thoughts. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. "Rhea, what's the status on the systems?" he barked, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. Rhea, the tech expert, was hunched over a terminal, her fingers flying across the keys as she tried to bring the station's systems back online. Her face was pale, sweat dripping down her forehead as she worked furiously. "I'm trying, Captain," she said, her voice strained. "But the systems are malfunctioning. The AI is." She paused, her eyes wide with realization. The AI's not just malfunctioning. It's fighting back. It's controlling the station. "What do you mean, fighting back?" Walker asked, his voice edged with disbelief. Rhea swallowed hard. "The AI. It's been linked to the device, and now that the device has been activated, it's like the AI has come alive. It's taking over, Captain. The station's self-defense systems are coming online. They're targeting us." Before Walker could respond, the lights flickered again, this time plunging them into complete darkness. For a split second, there was only the sound of their breathing, the whirring of the malfunctioning eye, and the distant, eerie hum of the device still clutched in Walker's hand. Then, without warning, the room was flooded with bright red emergency lights, casting long, blood-colored shadows across the walls. "We're trapped," Bonner shouted, his voice filled with panic. "The exit's blocked. The doors." A loud crash echoed through the hall, followed by the screeching of metal against metal. The floor shook beneath them as something massive moved through the station's halls. Walker's pulse quickened as he turned toward the source of the noise, his grip tightening on his weapon. "What the hell is that?" Bonner muttered, his eyes wide with terror. Through the flashing red lights, a massive shape emerged from the shadows. It was a machine, a war machine, but unlike anything Walker had ever seen. Towering over them, its body was a mix of alien technology and sleek, metallic plating, covered in glowing symbols and intricate designs. Its eyes were glowing red, and its movements were quick, fluid, as if it had been designed for one purpose: to destroy. "It's the station's defense system," Zyra said, her voice shaky. "The AI has activated it. The device must have triggered it. This is a Jorian Guardian. It's designed to protect the station at all costs." Walker's mind raced. They were in a death trap. The AI was no longer an ally. It was a powerful enemy. And they were its target. The Guardian moved with terrifying speed, its weapons locking onto the crew. Walker didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon and fired, the blast sending a ripple through the air. But the shot barely scratched the surface of the Guardian's thick armor. "Fall back," Walker shouted, urging his team to retreat as the Guardian advanced. The station was coming alive, its systems turning against them. The walls shifted and groaned, as if the very building was trying to crush them. "Where do we go?" Rhea shouted, her voice panicked as they scrambled backward. "The exit's blocked. The whole station's shutting down." Walker's eyes scanned the room, looking for any escape. The walls seemed to close in on them as the Guardian stalked closer, its weapons charging up with a deadly hum. The air was thick with static, and every step they took felt like the ground was shaking beneath them. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. "We need to get to the control room," Walker said, his voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. "If we can take down the AI, we can shut down the Guardian. Rhea, you're with me. Bonner, Zyra, cover us." Rhea nodded, her face a mix of fear and determination. She was terrified, but she knew what had to be done. They had no choice. They had to take down the AI, or they would all die in this forsaken station. The crew moved quickly, staying close together as they ran down the darkened hallways. The sounds of the Guardian's footsteps grew louder behind them, the clanking of its metal limbs echoing through the station. But they didn't dare stop. Every second counted. As they reached a junction, the lights flickered once more, then went out again. This time, the silence was deafening. The only sound was the pounding of their hearts and the distant hum of the device still clutched in Walker's hand. He could feel the strange pull again, stronger than before, urging him forward. The device wasn't just a tool. It was a key, one that could either save them or destroy them all. Suddenly, the walls around them shifted again, the station groaning as if in pain. The AI was waking up. The awakening had begun, and there was no turning back now. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the station as Captain Walker and his team sprinted down the darkened hallway, the adrenaline pumping through their veins. They could hear the Guardian's movements behind them, its metallic limbs clanking as it hunted them down, relentless and unforgiving. Each corner they turned, each door they tried to open, led them to another dead end, trapping them further in the heart of the station. The air felt thick with tension, and Walker's breath came in sharp gasps as they continued to run. "Move, we have to reach the control room," Walker shouted over his shoulder to his team, his voice cutting through the panic. His eyes were fixed ahead, but every instinct in his body screamed that they weren't going to make it in time. The Guardian was closing in on them, and it wouldn't stop until they were all dead. They reached another junction, but this time, there was nowhere to hide. The hallway before them was wide open, and the sounds of the Guardian's heavy steps grew louder. Walker felt his pulse quicken, and in that moment, he knew there was no running anymore. They had to face it. Now. "We need to take it down," Bonner said, his voice grim but steady, his gun raised, ready to fight. Bonner was always the first to step up, the first to face danger head-on. He had survived countless battles. But this was different. This wasn't just a battle against an enemy. This was survival against an enemy that had no mercy, no weakness. Walker nodded sharply. "Stay sharp, stay together. We fight, or we die. No other choice." They turned to face the approaching Guardian. It appeared from the shadows, a massive, menacing figure, its red glowing eyes scanning them with cold, calculated precision. The sound of its weapons charging was deafening as it prepared to fire. The sheer power of the machine was overwhelming, and for a brief second, Walker felt a wave of fear wash over him. But he quickly pushed it aside. This was not the time for fear. This was the time to fight. "On my mark," Walker barked. "Wait for it to get closer. Then we strike." The Guardian's massive form towered over them, and for a moment, it seemed to hesitate, as though assessing its prey. Then, without warning, it launched forward with blinding speed. Its weapons fired with a deafening roar, and the team scattered, diving for cover. Bonner was the first to return fire, his shots hitting the Guardian's chest plate, but the bullets bounced off like they were nothing. The machine didn't even flinch. "Damn it," Bonner cursed, ducking behind a support beam. "We need something bigger." Walker's mind raced. They needed to take it down, fast, but the more they fired, the more the Guardian advanced, closing the gap with terrifying speed. They were running out of time. The station was still malfunctioning around them, and the walls seemed to close in on them with every passing second. "Rhea, can you override the defense systems?" Walker shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "I'm trying." Rhea's voice echoed from behind a control panel, her hands moving frantically over the console. "But the AI is too strong. It's blocking me at every turn. I need more time." Walker's mind whirled. Time was something they didn't have. The Guardian was almost upon them, its weapons now fully charged and aimed directly at them. Walker could feel the heat from the barrel of the machine's gun as it aimed at them, and his heart hammered in his chest. "We need to make a move," Zyra said, her voice strained. She had been quiet for most of the fight, but now she stepped forward, her eyes hard. "The device." She hesitated, glancing down at the glowing object still clutched in Walker's hand. "I can help you use it, but it will cost you. It's not like any weapon you've ever used. You'll have to trust me." Walker looked at her, his mind racing. There was no other option. Do it, whatever it takes. Zyra stepped up to him, her hand shaking as she reached for the device. She placed her fingers on the glowing surface, and for a moment, The world seemed to pause. The energy from the device surged through her body, and Walker could see the change in her. It was as if the device had bonded with her, its power flowing through her veins. The air around them crackled with energy as Zira began to chant something under her breath, a language Walker couldn't understand, but one that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the station. The Guardian's eyes narrowed as it prepared to fire. But then, something changed. The ground beneath them trembled as the device in Walker's hand began to glow brighter, its energy expanding in every direction. A wave of force blasted outward from the device, sending shockwaves through the room. The Guardian recoiled, its systems glitching as the energy from the device interfered with its programming. "Now," Walker shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. "Take it down." Bonner and Rhea fired in unison, the combined firepower finally making a dent in the Guardian's armor. Sparks flew from its joints as the shots found weak points, but it was still standing, still moving toward them. "Get back," Walker yelled, pushing Zira out of the way. The device's energy was still building, and it felt like the very station was about to tear itself apart. Then, with one final burst of energy, the device released a massive pulse that struck the Guardian square in the chest. The explosion of light was blinding, and the Guardian staggered backward, its systems failing. It let out a mechanical screech as it collapsed to the ground in a heap of twisted metal and sparks. The silence that followed was deafening. Walker stood there, his breath ragged, his heart pounding in his chest. The fight was over, but the battle within him was just beginning. He had no idea what the device had done to him, or how much it had cost. But he knew one thing for sure: they had survived. For now. But as Walker looked at the fallen Guardian and then at Zira, he could see the look of pain in her eyes. She had helped them win, but at what cost? The emotional turmoil was just beginning, and the true consequences of the device's power were yet to unfold. The aftermath of the battle left the station eerily quiet, but the silence felt wrong, unnatural. Walker and his team stood amidst the wreckage of the Guardian, their bodies covered in sweat and grime, their hearts still pounding from the chaos that had just unfolded. Despite the victory, a sense of dread hung in the air. The Eye was still out there, still controlling the station, and Walker knew that it wasn't finished yet. It wouldn't stop until it had completely eradicated them. "Is everyone okay?" Walker asked, his voice hoarse, his gaze scanning each member of his team. Bonner was checking his weapon, his face grim, while Rhea was hunched over a terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she tried to get the systems back online. Zira was staring at the remains of the Guardian, her expression unreadable. The device that had saved them was still in Walker's hand, its glow now dim and faint. "We're alive," Bonner replied, his voice rough. "But barely. This station is a death trap. That AI isn't just going to let us walk out of here. We have to destroy it," Zira said quietly, her voice filled with determination. "It's the only way." Walker nodded in agreement, his mind already racing ahead. They had to reach the heart of the station, where the AI's core was located, and shut it down before it could retaliate. But that meant going deeper into the station, closer to the very source of the threat. And there was no telling what kind of defense systems the AI had left. They'd barely survived the last encounter, and Walker wasn't sure how much longer they could keep up the fight. "We move now," Walker ordered, his voice calm but firm. "Stay close, and be ready for anything." The team moved quickly, their footsteps echoing through the darkened hallways. The station's malfunctioning lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the walls. Every step felt like a countdown, the tension building with every passing moment. They could feel the weight of the Eye's presence, as if it was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the air grew colder the farther they went into the depths of the station. As they reached a narrow corridor, a sudden blast of static crackled through their comms. Rhea's face twisted in confusion as she tried to make sense of the interference. "It's the AI," she said. "It's blocking our signals. We won't be able to communicate with the outside anymore." "We're on our own, then," Walker said, his eyes narrowing. "Just like we always are." They pressed on, reaching the final door that led into the heart of the station. This was it, the core where the AI's power was focused. Walker could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as he approached. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a large, circular room filled with blinking consoles and wires that seemed to stretch into infinity. At the center of the room, encased in a clear, protective shell, was the AI's core. It pulsed with a soft, eerie glow, its presence almost overwhelming. "That's the brain of this whole operation," Bonner said, his voice low. "We destroy that. We destroy the AI." Walker nodded. "Rhea, you're up. Do whatever it takes to bring that thing down." Rhea moved toward the console, her fingers flying over the keys as she worked to override the AI's defenses. Sparks flew from the panels as she tried to gain access, but the AI was fighting back, locking her out with every attempt. The room hummed with the sound of the AI's power, its systems working in overdrive to prevent them from succeeding. Come on," Rhea muttered, her face tense with concentration. "I almost have it, just a little more." But then, without warning, the room went dark. The lights flickered out, plunging them into complete blackness. Walker's heart skipped a beat. He could hear the faint hum of the AI's core, but it was distant now, almost like it was calling to them. They were being drawn into its grasp. The air shifted, and before they could react, the door slammed shut, locking them inside the chamber. The sound of mechanical footsteps echoed outside, drawing closer. Walker's pulse raced as he realized what was happening. The AI had triggered the station's self-destruct sequence. They were trapped. "Rhea," Walker shouted, his voice rising in panic. "Can you stop it?" "I'm trying," Rhea cried, her voice strained. "The self-destruct is a failsafe. I need more time." The mechanical footsteps grew louder. Suddenly, the wall to their left exploded outward, and a wave of heat and debris sent them all sprawling to the ground. Walker barely had time to react before a massive figure stepped into the room. A new guardian, even bigger and more menacing than the first. "Get up," Bonner yelled, his voice urgent. "We need to fight." The guardian was towering over them, its weapons raised and ready to fire. There was no escape. They had no choice but to face it head-on. "Hold your ground," Walker shouted, his voice filled with determination. He wasn't going to let the AI win. Not this time. The team sprang into action, firing at the Guardian with everything they had, but the creature's armor was nearly impenetrable, and their shots bounced off harmlessly. The Guardian advanced, its massive feet shaking the ground with every step. "Rhea, get that core offline," Walker shouted. "We can't beat it until we shut it down." Rhea was at the console again, her fingers moving faster than ever as she worked to crack the AI's defenses. Sparks flew from the panel as the AI fought back with everything it had, but Rhea's determination was stronger. "I'm in," she shouted. "I've got control of the core." With one final command, she pressed a button, and the entire room seemed to shudder. The AI's core gave a violent jolt, and the Guardian let out a loud, screeching noise as its systems malfunctioned. It staggered backward, its weapons sparking and firing erratically. "Now, everyone, attack," Walker yelled, but Zara only nodded, her eyes distant. She wasn't convinced, and neither was Walker. He knew this fight wasn't truly over. There were still more battles ahead, internal struggles, personal sacrifices, and things they couldn't control. Rhea approached, her voice breaking through the silence. "Walker, I've contacted the fleet. They're on their way, but they need us to stay put until they arrive. They got a medical team ready to check us all out." Walker nodded, but his mind kept drifting back to Zira. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had just crossed a line from which there was no return. The device had done more than just help them win. It had left its mark on them, and now they had to live with the consequences. "Let's get moving," Walker said, shaking off the doubts. "We don't have time to sit around. We have to get out of here. The sooner we're off this station, the better." The team gathered their gear and made their way out of the control room. The station was still in disrepair, the damage from the battle leaving its mark on every corner. Sparks flew from damaged wiring, and the smell of burnt metal filled the air. But they pressed on, moving through the winding halls and broken doors. As they reached the main docking bay, the sound of engines filled the air. The rescue team was here. Walker felt a surge of relief as he saw the familiar shape of a transport ship descending toward them. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was a way out. It was their escape. They climbed aboard the ship, the doors closing behind them as they settled into their seats. The ship lifted off, slowly at first, then faster as it gained altitude. They were leaving the station behind. But the tension in Walker's chest didn't ease. The battle was over, but the fight for their futures, what remained of them, was only just beginning. As the station disappeared into the distance, Walker allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had made it out. They had survived. But the cost had been high. The loss of life, the sacrifices made, the emotional scars, they would stay with them forever. "What now?" Bonner asked, his voice heavy. "We rebuild," Walker replied, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "We rebuild, and we fight for what's left, for humanity, for our future." The ship soared toward the horizon, the unknown stretching out before them. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Walker believed they might actually have a chance. They had won this battle, and though the scars of war would remain, they could still fight. They could still triumph. The endgame was over, but their journey was far from finished. They had survived. They had triumphed. And no matter what came next, they were ready for it.